I didn't find out my house was no longer mine in a dramatic way. There was no argument. No raised voices. No warning. I found out on a Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen, holding a plain white envelope that didn't even have the decency to look important. The kettle had just started to whistle. The kind of soft, impatient sound that usually tells me everything in my life is still in its place. I turned it off, slit the envelope open, and scanned the first line. Notice of property title update. I remember thinking it was a mistake. That happens when you've lived in the same house for nearly 30 years. Your brain rejects the impossible before your heart has time to panic. The address was correct. The lot number was correct. The county seal was real. But the name listed under primary owner wasn't mine. It was Evan Carter. My stepson. I read it again. Then a third time. Slowly. Like I had forgotten how words worked. According to the document in my hands, my house, the one I was standing in, barefoot, wearing my old sweater, the one I paid property taxes on every year, had been transferred 6 months ago. I was no longer the owner. I was listed as an occupant. Occupant. Not resident. Not co-owner. Not even family. Just someone who happened to still be inside. I sat down at the kitchen table without realizing I was doing it. The chair scraped loudly against the tile, and that sound, sharp, ugly, made my chest tighten. 6 months. That meant this happened while I was still paying the bills. While I was still fixing the leaking sink. While I was still shoveling the front steps in winter. While I was still alive. I flipped through the rest of the pages with shaking hands. Signatures. Dates. A notary stamp. And then I saw it. My name. Not as the owner, but as a witness. A witness to my own erasure. I tried to remember signing anything. I told myself I would remember something like that. A transfer. A deed. A conversation. But all I could think of were the little moments. Evan asking me to just sign something real quick because he was helping organize paperwork after his father died. Me signing without my glasses because I trusted him. Me telling myself, he's family. Why would I need to read every line? I poured myself a cup of tea I didn't want. My hands were trembling so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim. I looked around the kitchen. The cabinet door I had repaired with my own hands. The window I had paid to replace after the storm 3 years ago. The small crack in the ceiling that never quite bothered me enough to fix. Every inch of this house held the quiet weight of time. Of effort. Of survival. And now, on paper, it belonged to someone who didn't even live here. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. No warnings. So I did the one thing that still felt logical. I called Evan. He answered on the third ring, cheerful, distracted. "Hey," he said. "Everything okay?" I stared at the document in my hand. "Evan," I said carefully, "did you change the ownership of my house?" There was a pause. Not a confused pause. A calculated one. "Well," he said slowly, "that sounds a little dramatic." My stomach dropped. "I'm holding a document from the county," I replied. "It says the house is in your name." Another pause. Longer this time. Then a sigh. "Look," he said, "it's not what you think. It's just paperwork. You're still living there, aren't you?" I didn't answer. "You're overreacting," he added quickly. This was just planning ahead. Planning ahead. For what? I asked. For your future, he said, like he was doing me a favor. For everyone's future. I looked down at the word occupant again. And in that moment, something inside me went very still. Because people don't plan ahead without telling you. They don't move assets quietly unless they're afraid of being told no. And they don't turn a woman into an occupant unless they've already decided she's temporary. Why wasn't I told? I asked. Well, Evan said, his voice tightening, we didn't want to stress you out. We. That was the first time he said we. I realized then that this decision hadn't been made by one person. It had been discussed. Agreed upon. Signed off. While I was still making dinner. Still paying taxes. Still believing I was home. I folded the document carefully and placed it on the table. The kettle was cold now. The tea untouched. And for the first time since my husband died, I understood something with absolute clarity. I hadn't lost my house by accident. I had been written out of it. The house looked welcoming from the outside. Fresh paint. Trim hedges. Wind chimes tapping softly against the porch rail. The kind of place people point to and say, they've done well for themselves. Margaret stood on the walkway with her overnight bag in one hand and a casserole dish in the other. She had made it that morning, chicken and thyme. His favorite, once. Her stepson, Daniel, opened the door with a smile that reached his mouth but not his eyes. Hey, Margaret, he said. You made good time. Inside, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and coffee. Everything was neat. Controlled. No photographs of her husband anywhere, just family portraits of Daniel, his wife Claire, and their 2 children. She noticed. She always noticed. They ate dinner politely. Talked about traffic, school schedules, whether that wasn't behaving like it used to. Margaret laughed in the right places. Asked about the kids. Complimented the food. She did not mention the chair. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the children were sent upstairs, Claire busied herself wiping an already clean counter. Daniel sat across from Margaret at the table. He folded his hands. Margaret, he began, lowering his voice, we should talk. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. She had heard this tone before. At hospitals. At offices. At funerals. I've been thinking, he continued, about what's best for everyone. Everyone. That word always meant not you. He glanced toward the hallway, then back at her. You know this arrangement, having you stay with us, it's temporary. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. Of course. But, he added, quickly now, as if speed might soften the words, temporary has a way of stretching. Claire stopped wiping the counter. She didn't turn around. Daniel cleared his throat. We think it might be better if you found something more permanent. Margaret waited. There's a nice assisted living place, he said. Close by. Safe. Structured. Structured. She looked at his hands, so much like his father's. Hands that once reached for hers when he was a boy. I'm not sick, Margaret said quietly. No, no, of course not, Daniel replied. It's not about that. It was always about that. It's just, the kids need consistency, he went on. And Claire works from home. And space. I stay in the guest room, Margaret said. I clean up after myself. I know, he said quickly. You've been great. This isn't personal. She smiled then. Small. Controlled. That's usually what people say, she replied, right before it becomes very personal. Silence filled the kitchen. Claire finally turned around. We just think, she said gently, that you'd be happier somewhere with people your own age. Margaret looked at her. Really looked. You mean somewhere I won't be in the way, she said. Claire didn't answer. Daniel stood up, signaling the conversation was over. We'll help you with the move, he said. Of course. Help you disappear. That night, Margaret lay awake in the guest room. The mattress was soft. Too soft. The ceiling fan hummed in a rhythm she didn't recognize. She stared at the door. She thought of her house, the one she had been pulled away from. The table she no longer sat at. The chair that kept being reassigned. By morning, she would pack her bag. Not because she agreed, but because she had learned something far more important. They weren't pushing her out because she was weak. They were pushing her out because she still belonged somewhere. And it wasn't under their roof. Margaret didn't argue in the morning. She folded the guest blanket the way she always had, tight corners, no wrinkles. Placed it at the foot of the bed. In the kitchen, Claire's calendar was pinned to the fridge. Color-coded. Controlled. Full. Margaret made tea for herself. Didn't offer anyone else. Daniel came in halfway through her second sip. "You're up early," he said. "Yes," Margaret replied. "I wanted to leave quietly." He hesitated. "That's not necessary." "I know," she said. "It's just easier." She washed her cup. Dried it. Put it back exactly where she found it. No goodbyes to the children. No explanations. At the door, Daniel finally spoke. "We'll start looking at places this week," he said. "Somewhere comfortable." Margaret picked up her bag. "I've already found one," she replied. That stopped him. She stepped onto the porch. The wind chimes moved again. "It's not assisted living," she added, almost kindly. "It's a small apartment. Near the old library." Daniel frowned. "You didn't tell us." She looked at him then, really looked. "I've spent years explaining myself," she said. "I'm done asking for space." She left. Weeks passed. The house stayed clean. The schedule stayed tight. But something began to slip. The children stopped asking about their grandfather's stories. The holidays felt thinner. Less anchored. No one noticed at first. Until tax season. Until legal paperwork. Until Daniel realized the house, her house, was no longer listed under family assets. Margaret had sold it. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. She used the money to fund the community library program her husband once volunteered at. Story hours. Reading benches. A plaque with his name. Her name wasn't on it. She didn't need it to be. On a quiet afternoon, Margaret sat in the front row of the library. Children gathered around her chair. "Tell us the one about the lion again," a little girl asked. Margaret smiled. And began. Not because she had been invited. But because she belonged. Time passed the way it always does. Quietly. Without asking permission. Daniel's life stayed busy. Meetings. Deadlines. School pickups. Claire's calendar remained full. They told themselves Margaret was fine. She had chosen this. That belief made things easier. Until the first Thanksgiving without her. The table was set carefully. New centerpiece. Extra place settings. But no one knew where to sit. The children hovered. "Whose chair is that?" the younger one asked, pointing to the end of the table. Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it again. They ate anyway. The food tasted correct. Nothing wrong with it. That was the problem. Months later, Daniel found an envelope while sorting old files. Not addressed to him. Just labeled, "In case." Inside were photocopies. Birth certificates. Marriage records. A handwritten inventory of objects. And a note. Not angry. Not long. "I kept what mattered. You kept what was convenient." That night, Daniel drove. He didn't know why at first. Only that the house felt too quiet. The library lights were still on. Through the glass, he saw her. Margaret sat in the same chair every week now. Children gathered around her like gravity had decided where it belonged. She was laughing. Not politely. Not carefully. Freely. Daniel stayed outside. For the first time, he understood. She hadn't left to punish them. She had left to continue. And the seat at their table was never empty. They had simply given it away. Some people don't disappear when you remove them. They reappear. Where they are remembered. Margaret did not hear about Daniel's visit to the library. She wasn't meant to. Some understandings are private. Life continued in small, steady ways. She learned which mornings the sun reached the reading chairs first. Which children arrived early just to sit near her. Which stories calmed restless hands. She never spoke about the house. Or the table. There was no need. One afternoon, a volunteer asked her, "Do you miss your family?" Margaret considered the question. "I miss who we were," she said. "Not who we became." The answer surprised even her. Years later, the library expanded. A new wing. More light. More space. At the entrance stood a plaque. In memory of Thomas Collins. Because stories are how we stay. Margaret stood beside it, her hand resting lightly on the frame. No one announced her. No one needed to. The children still called her by name. On opening day, Daniel came. He stood in the back this time. Watched as Margaret helped a boy sound out a difficult word. Watched her nod, patient, unhurried. He did not interrupt. Some things are not meant to be reclaimed. That evening, Margaret returned to her apartment. She set the kettle on. Sat at a small table by the window. One chair. Occupied. She opened a book and began to read. Not aloud. Just for herself. A seat is not where you are placed. It is where you are remembered. And where you choose to remain.